Hi there, motorhome owners. Today on your 2011 Ford F-53 chassis, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Air Lift's LoadLifter 5000 air helper springs for the front axle. And this is what our airbags look like when they're installed. They replace our factory jounce bumper, and they will go in a similar location between our front axle and our frame. They are a little bit slightly further forward, but they're going to perform similar functions, except we're going to get those benefits throughout our suspension travel, whereas our jounce bumper from the factory really only applies once our suspension has bottomed out to give us that support right at that last little bit of travel. Once you've hit the jounce bumper on your factory suspension, you've basically exhausted the travel of your suspension, and it gets really stiff at that point once you're down on that jounce bumper. With our airbags here, we can use air pressure, and you can see that we're contacting the frame and our axle right now, and we're under just our normal load, and we're already getting support from our airbags now before our suspension has even traveled down in its normal resting position. So this way, throughout our entire suspension travel, our airbag is going to be providing assistance. This is going to help smooth out our ride. It's going to help eliminate sway, because as we want to roll this direction, this bag wants to push back up to help level us back out. And we've got one on the other side as well, so they work back and forth with each other to help keep us upright. And even though we remove our factory jounce bumper to put our airbags in, we're still going to get the same benefits of having a jounce bumper, because inside of our airbag there's an internal jounce bumper there. So if we do happen to fully compress our suspension to its maximum, we've got that jounce bumper in there to provide us with support, so when we bottom out we're going to be hitting on that rubber. So adding these airbags, we're going to get up to 5,000 pounds of support for that weight that we've got on our motorhome here. Before we install our components, we're going to go ahead and hit the test course and just get a baseline on how our motorhome feels beforehand. We're going to start by going into our uneven bump section, and this is going to mimic going over potholes that you might just hit on one side, and that gets it swaying back and forth. And this is one of the things I do expect us to see some improvements on once we get our components installed. And it is pretty sloppy when we hit that. We do get quite a bit of rocking going on inside here. So our components inside are definitely rattling around, and we should expect to have quite a bit of minimization on that once our components are installed. Next, we're going into the even bump section. This is going to be the more porpoising up and down, front to back, and this is going to be like going over a speed bump or pulling in and out of your driveway. And it hits the bumps pretty good. It doesn't really feel like we got a whole lot of cushion up there in the front, but it does not too bad on our porpoising. It almost wants to rock back and forth more side to side. It seems like this motorhome has sway issues more than anything. Lastly, we're going to be going into our slalom section here, and this is going to mimic an evasive maneuver. So we're going to start getting her going back and forth like we were having to whip around an object in the road, and we're going to see how the motorhome responds, whether or not it feels like we have the confidence to be able to make those maneuvers, or if we would feel like we would have to back off because we just don't trust the suspension and handling of our motorhome here. So we're heading into the section now. Oh yeah, she's definitely got some sway. I mean, we really feel the G-forces when you start to turn it. I don't even really want to go too crazy with this guy here, just because it really has a lot of rocking going on. Even when we just kind of come to a stop, you can see it kind of wants to bounce back and forth as it's trying to bring itself back straight again. Now with our airbags installed, we're going to head back out on the test course. We're heading into our uneven bump section first, and before we had a lot of sway back and forth. I already noticed there's already quite a huge difference in the amount of sway. We hit the bumps and it's significantly softer. We hit it a little harder there, and we do still have some sway, but there is definitely a noticeable improvement from before and after. Next, we're going to be heading into the even bump section, which is the forward and backward of our motorhome, and this is going to be similar to going over a speed bump. And when we hit the bump here, it does feel a little bit softer than it did before. It's not quite as abrupt when we hit it, but there's not a huge difference on our forward and backward movement there. It does seem like we don't have quite as much bouncing here in the front after we've got those installed. Last, we're going to be going into our slalom section here, and this is where I really expect to see quite a bit of improvements here, because before it really felt awfully soft when we were trying to whip it back and forth. It just was not very comfortable, and I wouldn't want to be sitting in this driver's seat if we had somebody slam on their brakes in front of us and we needed to just get over because we weren't going to be able to stop in time. So we're coming into that section now. Oh yeah, and it's quite a massive difference between the two. Not nearly as much sway on the inside here throwing us around. It does still exist. There are still some of our items moving, but as far as the comfort that you would have driving this and the confidence in the maneuverability of your motorhome, oh yeah, big difference. Before it was getting a little sketchy going back and forth there. It was really starting to rock it. These airbags come with everything you'll need to get them installed. There's no drilling required, so why don't you follow along with me and we'll show you how to get them installed. We'll begin our installation underneath the front of our vehicle. We'll need to remove the factory jounce bumpers, and in order to do so, you'll want to use your leveling jacks to lift up on the front of the vehicle. This is going to increase the clearance between the jounce bumper and the front axle so you can get your tools in there to work. Once you've got it lifted up, you do want to make sure you support it on the frame by jack stands because we don't want to trust just our hydraulic jacks of our motorhome while we're working underneath. Our jounce bumper is located here, and there is a hole in the bottom, and we can use an extension and a socket to slide up inside to remove the bolt. On our passenger side here, we can just use the socket only to remove the bolt. On the driver's side, you'll be able to see in the frame. It's not going to be enclosed like this, and there'll be a nut on there you'll want to hold with a 15mm wrench. On our passenger side here, it's welded. The nut is welded to the frame since you can't get inside of it. We're just going to remove that here. We're going to save the bolt here on our passenger side. When you're removing your driver's side jounce bumper, you can just take it off and set it aside. We're not going to be putting anything back. But over here on our passenger side, we're going to take the bolt and the spacer plate that comes in our kit. We're going to reinstall our factory bolt right up in there and hold our spacer plate here to where it is nice and solid and flush with our bracket right here. And then we're just going to tighten this down. We're now going to do some pre-assembly on our bag. The top of your bag is going to have 3 holes in it, and the bottom's just going to have 2 holes. The odd hole here that's slightly raised, whereas these 2 are going to be flush here, is going to accept our air fitting. So we can go ahead and thread that in there. And we want to make sure we have at least 2 or 3 of the threads that are coated in the sealant threaded down inside of there. And we're going to tighten it down with an 11mm wrench. We can then take our upper bracket, and it's going to sit right on our bag, and the holes in the bottom of our bracket here are going to line up with the holes in our airbag. The large cutout here is for our air fitting. We'll then take the bolts that come in our kit. We're going to place a lock washer on it, followed by a flat washer, and then we're going to thread those down through the top of our bracket into our airbag. Our lower bracket here is going to have the square holes facing towards the front of the vehicle. And our airbag is going to be installed on the inside set of holes. So we're going to be pre-assembling the passenger side airbag here. So this is going to be the inside then of our vehicle, and this will be the outside of our vehicle. We want the tall portion of our upper bracket here to be towards the outside of the vehicle. So it's going to center it almost right here in the middle of our bracket. We'll then flip this over, and we're going to use the tapered bolts here to secure it to the bottom side of our airbag, lining up these holes. And these will just thread right down in there. And then we'll snug them down with a 7/32 Allen key. We can then go back and torque our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. We can now lift our airbag into position. So we're going to lift it up over our spring here. Okay. Now that we've got it set into position, You want to check on the opposite side here and make sure you're not pinching any of your wiring. So you can see here I've got this wire pulled out and our bracket is flush up against the frame. We don't want to pinch any of our wiring or components or anything here. You can see here on ours we do have a hole pre-drilled in our frame. Now if you don't have a hole pre-drilled in your frame, you will have to use your bracket as a template and drill your own. Since we have a hole here, we can go ahead and use the bolt that comes in our kit and a flat washer, slide it on it, and then slide our bolt on through. Now here on the other side, you're not really going to be able to see this bolt where it passes through, but this is the opening directly above the jounce bumper where that weld nut is that we talked about earlier. Our bolt's going to pass through the side of the frame. You can reach your arm in this hole here, and you're just going to have to feel for the bolt. Then slide your flat washer on it and then put your locking nut on after that. We can then go ahead and snug these up. You do want to make sure you've got your airbag seated all the way against the bottom of the frame. So if you've got your suspension lifted up too high to where it's not touching the bottom, you'll want to lower it back down just a little bit until it does. Then we'll tighten it down with a 19mm socket and wrench. We can then go back and torque this bolt to the specifications outlined in our instructions. Now back here down below, at the front of our lower bracket, you're going to have a couple of square holes. There's going to be one on each side of our leaf spring, and we're going to take the carriage bolts that come in our kit and drop down through those holes. We can then put our bracket in place underneath. Now, if you've got your suspension hanging and you're lifted up with your jacks, if you've got it lifted up too high, it's actually going to bring your sway bar here too close to the leaf spring, so you won't be able to fit this in place. So you just have to lower down your suspension just a little bit, lower your vehicle down, let those wheels touch the ground to give yourself a little bit of clearance in here. We're then going to finish this up by placing a flat washer over our carriage bolts and then threading on a nylon locking nut. Once you've got both of those started, you're just going to take your lower leaf spring now and just center it so your airbag is nice and level up and down. Because this bracket here on the back side, this little flange here, sits in between your shock mount and your leaf spring U-bolt here, and it does have a little bit of play back and forth there. You can change your position slightly. We just want to change it till it's straight up and down, and then we're going to snug down our carriage bolts using a 9/16 socket. And you want to go back and forth to make sure they tighten down evenly. Then we can go back and torque our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. We can now install our driver's side the exact same way that we installed the passenger side. The only difference here is that that little spacer plate we had to install when we removed our jounce bumper is not over on this driver's side here, so you can skip that step and just put the airbags in. Now we're going to be routing our air lines from our airbags to the location where we want to reach our fittings so we can easily inflate them. We're going to be running ours to the front to where we can easily access them here in the open compartment. But I wanted to point out when cutting your airline here, since this is going to attach with our airbags using quick connect fittings, it's important to have a nice clean square cut in order for it to seal properly. You'll want to make sure you're using a pair of hose cutters because it's going to give you that clean square cut. If you were to use a pair of side cutters like this, it would squish it and deform it to where it wouldn't seal properly. We have hose cutters here at etrailer.com. They're a little bit smaller of a pair, which works out pretty nicely for you guys there at home. We mounted our air fittings in our open compartment here in the front. Our customer had some locations that he already decided where he wanted them, and he had already pre-drilled holes for our fittings to go into. Our customer wanted them to be just behind the opening here, just above his headlight, where he could easily reach in here to fill them up. He just drilled a hole in the bracket here. 5/16 will be plenty close to the size you'll need here. That's what I would recommend for drilling out for the fitting if you do need to add a hole. You'll thread a nut on one side, then place your star washer on it, and then on the other side you'll follow that up with a rubber spacer, flat washer, and nut. And you can see we just snugged those down there. They don't have to be crazy tight. You can use the two nuts to adjust the depth, but you're pretty much going to want it to be all the way down so you have as much sticking out as possible, so that way your air chuck is going to be able to press on there far enough to put air inside of it. We mounted the other one on the other side in basically the same location. From there, we routed our airline hose straight down. After coming down, we then just curved it back and went alongside the frame, zip tying it to any factory wiring along the way. We did make a small loop right here because we had some excess. You can trim out the excess if you want, but if you don't want to trim it out, it's always nice to have some extra here for the future in case you ever have to make any repairs or anything like that. You've got some extra hose. Just make sure you make a nice little loop in it. You don't want any real harsh bends or turns that's going to kink the line. Right after we make our loop, we're just going to curve our hose down, and then we're going to plug it into the quick connect fitting here on top of our airbag. It's a swivel fitting, so we can easily angle it however we need to. I'm going to have mine kind of pointing towards the back of the vehicle, and our end here is just going to push right into it, and it's just going to click in just like that. I like to kind of give it a tug just to make sure it's not going to come out and that we're fully seated all the way in there. We're going to route the driver's side basically in the exact same way as we did over here, looping up any excess we've got and then just plugging it right into the airbag. We can now air up our airbags and then we'll check for leaks. Just remove our cap. We can now check for leaks. You want to check at any connection point as well as your fittings. We're just going to spray it with some soapy water, and we're going to look for the presence of bubbles. Now, the little white bubbles you see around the bottom, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for bubbles that continually reproduce and make more and more bubbles, because that's going to be air coming out of the system creating those bubbles. Since we don't see any bubbles being produced up here, we have no leaks up here, we're going to go check down at our airbags. With no leaks present, that completes our installation. We're now ready to hit the road. Now let's talk to the rest of the team about this product.
Hi there, team. How's it going today? We just got done putting some airbags on our motorhome here. Did a video on it, talked about what they do, why the customer needs them. You guys got any additional thoughts or questions about them?
Yeah, man. So I was just going to ask, I guess like the first and foremost thing was why did the customer want to put air springs instead of doing like a sumo spring on the front of the motorhome?
Okay, yeah, we kind of just covered that, talked about that in the video. So our airbags here, they're going to be adjustable. So you can change the amount of pressure up or down. With the sumo springs, they're going to be at a set of what they do. They do compress to provide more support as they compress, but you can't change anything. What you get is what you get. These have internal jounce bumpers in them, so you still get that with these.
Yeah.
But as far as which ones I would recommend, I mean, it really comes down to the customer and their needs. So if this is somebody who doesn't want to ever have to air these things up or down, then I wouldn't recommend it for him, because as temperature changes, pressure goes up and down, that's going to change your air pressure. And so you're just going to have to frequently check these throughout the different parts of the year as you use your motorhome. Maybe it sits for 6 or 7 months or 3 or 4 months even. You're going to have to check those before you leave to make sure they're okay. With the sumo springs, you just hop in and go.
Right.
So it comes down to that customer and how they're planning on using it.
I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on what you think of those, Dave, like as far as those internal jounce bumpers on the airlift go, because I've heard good things and I've heard bad things.
I mean, it's cool that they're there, that's for sure, because if you had it, let's say you have a misfortunate event where there was something in the road and it popped up and it popped your bag, you've got that support from that internal jounce bumper there, because the suspension's going to want to slam down right after you lose the initial support. And with airbags, you're taking out that factory jounce bumper, so it's nice to still have that support in the emergency event that you need it.
And did they get a compressor for these or not?
No, they didn't get a compressor. So that's you did mention cost a little bit, how these were cheaper than the other options. The compressor would be the kind of the thing that would maybe change that, because some customers that don't want to maintain these, well, they have the option to get a compressor and then they don't have to worry about maintaining them. So the compressor could be a solution for the customer that's interested in them, that's interested in airbags and all the versatility they offer, but don't want to ever have to adjust that pressure.
Where did you guys install the valves for these anyway?
Yeah, we put one on each side. So these ones are dual path. This is how he requested it to be done. So he's got one just like this over on the other side.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, he already had the holes marked out and everything where he wanted them.
Yeah, it sounded like he wanted. He did his research. I think he knew what he wanted.
So we were kind of wondering, the people that are looking for airbags and sumo springs, how are they searching for these? Are they searching using our search bar? Are they using our Fit Guide? Are they just using Google? What kind of research have you guys got on that?
I think they're using the Fit Guide, and that's going to be the best way to do it for them. And as far as the motorhome stuff, I've dealt a lot more with the trucks, not so much with the motorhomes. So I'm not sure if they're putting in the chassis, you know what I mean? Like just doing F-53, like if they know, or if they're actually going in there. You know, I'm not entirely sure. But I do know that the easiest way for them to do that is through the Fit Guide to get the right thing. Because it's a little bit more complicated than like just type it in the truck, I think. So.
Yeah, and we always recommend the Fit Guide with these because there's just so many different options out there.
Yeah.
There's so many subtle differences between various years and the options you have on your particular motorhome on which ones will be better for you versus the other, or which ones are going to fit your motorhome versus other ones. Because just because it's an F-53 doesn't mean it's going to fit every single F-53
Right.
motorhome, but it will fit a lot of them. So it is definitely best to use the Fit Guide to make sure it is going to be a fit for yours.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we got a couple Fit Guide people in here. I didn't know if do you guys have any insights on that, or?
I know on the motorhome, you definitely want to check that gross vehicle weight rating before you select suspension products.
Mm-hmm.
That's really critical for fit.
Yeah, people should always be prompted to use the Fit Guide. Once they come in, they're usually coming in straight from Google, and hit up something like air springs just in general will bring them to a certain product page, and from there they should be prompted to actually go through the Fit Guide and enter all of their information in. How our RV Fit Guide works, though, yeah, Jen could probably speak a little bit better too, because it is a little bit different.
So basically on the RV side, we just basically duplicate. So for the F-53, it's gonna be the same thing on the side for the RV, obviously, but the vehicle itself is going to be different, but the styles remain the same.
Okay.
Do we have a selection for the gross vehicle weight?
For the F-53, yes, it's based on the TVWR. That's the actual style selection there.
Okay, so the style selection up at the top to narrow it down. Cool.
Correct.
From experience, we have had customers order airbags based on the chassis, and then the motorhome got here to find out they didn't fit that particular motorhome due to upfitter equipment that was put on their motorhome that made it not fit the chassis. So that's why it's real important they do use their particular motorhome.
Yeah.
All right, well, if you guys don't got any more questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap her up.
And that completes our installation of Air Lift's LoadLifter 5000 air helper springs on the front axle for our 2011 Ford F-53 chassis.